Adventures with Purpose arrived and managed to locate her vehicle in only 14 feet of water, 55 feet from the shore, right next to where she was last seen and where her last phone ping was. They found Kiely despite being told by authorities that the lake had already been thoroughly searched.
It is the reason why we're here is because of the community support and the amount of work that was put into this investigation to where we could clearly identify very specific areas to search. The Adventures with Purpose folks did just a fantastic job at being able to locate the vehicle as quickly as they did, based on, again, a lot of heavy lifting that the folks behind me have done throughout the last couple of weeks.
We're struggling with clues, and so searches aren't super successful if you don't have a direction of where to search. Yeah, the ping for the data points and everything were near the water. It's not a very big lake overall. It's a man-made reservoir.
And what's the name of the dive team?
There's a lot of teams out there, so I don't know specifically. I know Alameda was mentioned. I don't know which all teams were brought in.
We were tasked on that particular event with looking for a cell phone. So they were asked by the investigators and the county sheriff that was leading that investigation to search the shoreline from the bank of the lake 25 feet outward and stop and stay on that line, that depth along abreast of.
Wow. So they were 20, they were halfway there.
They were halfway there.
It typically for us in such, that was extremely shallow waters, and that was rare for us to have that visibility.
It's like going through mud. So these are tough operations.
Like Paul was saying, it's typically what we're finding stuff in you can't see in, or it would have been found already.
A diving operation like that is really almost like you're going into the water blind, and they're basically searching with hands.
It was very shallow, no current, great visibility.
And tracking underwater is an extremely difficult thing to do.
Well, that was very easy for us to do.
We're appreciative that they were able to come out and locate it. I also don't want to take away, though, from anything from our volunteers, as well as law enforcement that have been out there. I mean, we literally had people swim.
Going to briefly speak to you all today. Really, it's a commentary and reflection regarding the Kiely Rodni Autopsy / Coroner medical investigation publication that came out 2 days ago. Prior to making any brief commentary on that, I did want to mention that I am a board-certified family practitioner, which means that I delivered thousands of babies over the 30 years that I've been in practice. I've also taken care of newborns, pediatrics, adolescents, young adults, and geriatric patients from an internal medicine perspective. I have a fellowship from Brown Medical School in maternal child health and obstetrics. And I also have many, many years of psychiatry training. I have sadly dealt with victims of domestic violence, children in SA situations, over the many years that I have been in practice. Seen some of my patients suicide from overdoses of unintentional overdoses, intentional overdoses, etc. So I'm quite seasoned in attending the examination of deceased individuals, also in being present at crime scenes, fatal car accidents, emergency room traumas, trauma surgery, in helping to assist trauma surgeons, and sadly, dozens of families I've unfortunately had to sit with and notify them of the death of a loved one. And we always do this in person. We always sit down, look at the patient's family, and we tell them the news. It's never done by telephone. Basically, this statement said in this article, and again, I'll link this, that especially when looking at the potential for a drowning victim, it is paramount for all agencies to coordinate one with the other, to communicate one with the other, because especially if concerned about a drowning versus a drowning suicide versus a homicide, and then somebody was dumped, so to speak, in a body of water, every single aspect of the case needs to be communicated in a very transparent fashion amongst agencies, so that when the autopsy report or any of the investigative documents are published, they are published in a very cogent, easy to read, but complete manner. So I wanted to bring that to the fore. As a touch point, I want to make a quote, and I'm actually going to read it right now from something I wrote from this article, and that is, quote, "A submerged vehicle containing a body or bodies should be transported in its entirety to the medical examiner's office for in situ exam of the body and the vehicle to provide clues." Okay, so I'm throwing out concepts and ideas to you all, and I'm going to have you all go back to look at the documentation. But the question would be, and we're just going to ask the question, I'm sure you all know the answer, was Kiely's body removed from the vehicle and taken alone to the ME's office, or was the vehicle removed in the position that it was found? So in other words, it was found on its sort of on its roof. Was it removed from the water like that, not flipped, so as not to juggle the body or the location of the body or any evidence that might have spilled out, but that it was appropriately removed, not flipped, and taken to the medical examiner's office en masse, we say, mass, M-A-S-S-E, together. And that is important because if there was, for instance, any form of tethering of a body or even a seatbelt that may have inadvertently or purposefully been placed over, in this case, Kiely, and pulled out of the tailgate and then the tailgate shut to hold her in place, we need to know that. And so hopefully photographs were taken very carefully of her position, anything inside, by law enforcement prior to them ever even moving the car. And then hopefully not moving the car from its found position, protecting all windows if they were broken out, etc., in order to prevent any loss of evidence, etc. And then once the car has come out, to move, before opening a tailgate, etc., to move en masse the body with the car. And then for the investigators to be able to, again, chain of custody, step by step, with excellent documentation and communication, note how prior to opening the tailgate, prior to moving the car out of its found position, how was the body found? This is very important. And I will say no more on that. So as not to juggle the body or the location of the body or any evidence that might have spilled out, but that it was appropriately removed, not flipped, and taken to the medical examiner's office en masse, we say. E-N mass, M-A-S-S-E, together. And that is important.
After Adventures with Purpose found Kiely, authorities arrived and retrieved the vehicle by first flipping it underwater. 2 windows were already opened and they managed to break another one so that Kiely's belongings flew out into the water. And they were left there for over 2 weeks until a civilian found several items. Law enforcement were given the evidence but never entered the water themselves to see if anything else was down there still. The next day, on request of the family, the same guy went in and retrieved more items.
Yeah, so once the car was located, dive teams were assembled. I believe Placer County was probably still the primary dive team. They have to use lots of devices to lift the car, turn it over, and then the use of tow trucks was what made it possible for pulling the vehicle out of the water.
In forensics, we have standards and we have protocols for everything that we do in evidence collection, okay? And they were not followed, okay? And that's the plain, down and dirty, simple truth of the matter. It was not followed. There's only 2 reasons to deviate from a protocol or a standard, and that's life safety and evidence preservation. And neither of those 2 things, well, in terms of life safety, that didn't occur here. And evidence preservation obviously didn't occur here.
Hi, this is Dr. Amy Salerno, also known as Doctora Latina or Draw Latina. With this, what I deem evidence-informed evidence-based, data-driven, systematic approach to understanding autopsy and to understanding chain of custody, chain of command, importance of communication amongst law enforcement agencies, amongst the medical community and agencies, and very importantly, the resultant transparent, open, cogent, and comprehensive communication style that agencies bring to the table in order to inform the public.
To review Kiely Rodni's autopsy in terms of errors and inconsistencies. And every time I see one, I'm going to mark it with this blue mustache symbol you can see on the right. The very first document I wanted to have a look at is Kiely's autopsy record that came from Nevada County Sheriff's Office, and it does not have a date. So it does mention the date of the examination, which is August 23rd, but the document itself has no date and no page number. So it's kind of just floating in the documentation package on its own. The next page after this is the report of autopsy that starts with page 1, line 1. So we can assume that maybe this is a cover page, but how can a cover page have no annotation of a date? And then the signature of the medical legal certifier who certifies the cause of death should be signed in permanent black ink. But Mr. Gregory Reber brought his own pen, looks like, which was not black. Maybe he was using electronic authentication, which is also permitted. What do you guys think? But then if it's electronic, you can kind of adjust the saturation and make it black. So rubber stamps are not permitted, and neither are blue pens, actually. And if you're wondering where I'm taking this information, it's straight from the CDC. This week I was reading their medical examiners and coroners handbook on death registration, and a good resource, a good source was the chapter on general instructions for completing certificates and reports, and I highly advise anyone who worked on this documentation package to familiarize themselves with this handbook. The handbook had no information about using whiteout, and this image on the right comes from the autopsy record, so we're zooming into the specimens taken part. And if we look at it like a medical document, any error in documentation should have a single line written through it, this way or this way, and initialed by the person doing the correction. And as far as I know, you're also supposed to put the date on the correction. While this is not technically the law, the use of corrective materials in a medical record can suggest improper altering of a medical record, which is illegal. This part gets a mustache. If we look at the document in terms of forensics, altered forensic documents should be sent to Police Department Crime Laboratory Division to be examined for evidence of alterations, including erasures, discoloration, and smearing of printed entries, which I think we're seeing here because these ticks right here appear printed. This box right here appears whited out, which is illegal on a medical document as well as in a forensic document. It also mentions that stock tissue was collected as well as toxicology. And let's remember that. So liver was report of autopsy. It's the last page of this report we're looking at here. Well, this is just fabulous because Mr. Reber, MD, carrying on with his blue pen, and then He also looks like didn't have time to know the year using 4 digits, because if someone in the healthcare or medical environment put a date like this, which can be adjusted to 2000, it just doesn't work. It needs to be 4 digits, and that's actually what you see throughout all the documentation in this package. And what caught my eye was that they call Detective Josephine Strachan Josie, which is not her legal name. Why are they calling her Josie on a legal document? Next document is the coroner's final report. It was also produced by Nevada County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Moon, and she keeps surprising me. One document is undated, and then this document is dated, but the date is partially italicized, or like the 10 looks drunk and leaning to the right, just to simply put it. Report of autopsy is, look how the address is spelled out here. It's 8600 Cold Stream Road. And this is the legal address. This is the Google Maps address. But the address on the coroner's final report on investigation and the incident report, it spells it differently. So I am guessing the sheriff's office would know it better than Google. Let me know in the comments, you guys. What do you think? And next, let's look at the incident report. And this one got a lot of mustaches from me. I'm going to go through them one by one in the following slides. And actually, who inspired me to do this was Squirrels on Fire. It's an amazing channel. Shen has a great sense of humor, and she also has an incredible eye for detail and great organization skills. She pointed out that place of birth, citizen status, Kiely's status as a juvenile, and her SSN were all missing. So please go check out her channel. The link will be down below. So we put all our mustaches here. Let's pull out, our guidebook, handbook, and see what it says about the place of birth. So I want to point out first that this was filled in on the 21st of August. So Kiely has been missing for a little over 2 weeks at this point. And it surprises me that her place of birth is just blank, because if no information is available about a kid who's been missing for over 2 weeks, you just put unknown. You can't really leave it blank like that. In terms of the social security number, could it have been omitted due to her being a minor? It's possible, but then I would rather expect to see it redacted, not blank. If this is left blank, it means that the informant does not know the decedent's SSN at the time of the interview. So how can it be, I'm assuming her family would be the informant, how can it be that no one by the 21st knew her as a social security number? That's odd to me, amongst other cabinet of oddities that this documentation package is. Next is Kiely is mentioned to be not a juvenile. If we look at this report as a forensic medical document, so in terms of the medical part, and this categorization is also used in pharmacology, the juvenile is someone between the age of an infant and an adult. So if she's not a juvenile, medically speaking, she's an adult, which she can't be at age 16. And then from the legal perspective, juvenile falls between this age, the cutoff of which is 7 years. And then, if the kid does something really harmful, they can be taken to the juvenile court. But until they're 7, through common law, the child is not capable of committing a crime. Here again, we see that if Kiely is not a juvenile, she's an adult through this system as well. So these two systems kind of mirror each other. And actually, I wanted to take a look at the juvenile cutoff age, which I looked up on the website of the Interstate Commission for Juveniles. It's a fresh report, 2022. And we see that in California, the cutoff age is 18. But then if the kid does something severe, the age of criminal responsibility starts at 16, and it means that that kid can be taken to adult court jurisdiction, so it can just be taken to adult court. We see that 16 is the juvenile age. So the report of the autopsy, I've never seen anything like this on a medical or forensic document, because they are rounding the weight to the nearest 10. Kiely's heart was 90 grams, right lung 100, left lung 110, liver 400, kidneys 50 and 70, spleen 40 grams, brain 1,000 grams or 1 kilogram. Usually in medical documentation, we see rounding to the nearest whole or half. So this would be like 104 or 104.4, so something like that. But I've never seen a document with these roundings. Again, if you guys know the details of why it could have been done this way, please let me know. And then the
weights in grams, and what we do is we say and we look at averages. And so the average weight of a person who's drowned in lake water, and of course it depends on the measure and the level of decomposition, but the average drowning victim has a combined right and left lung weight of 1,300 grams, plus or minus about 400 grams. So the combined weights that you would be looking for as one of your constellation points would be, does this victim have a combined right and left lung weight of about 900 to about 1,700 grams? So go back and see what was, in the case of Kiely Rodni, the combined right and left lung, the summation of those weights. They were not near 1,300 grams. And in salt, and that would be in lake water, freshwater drownings. In saltwater, it's actually quite a bit more. Okay. There are other findings on
I received a phone call from Captain Sam Brown. Captain Brown told me the decedent in case 122-02506 had been positively identified as Kiely Rodni. The body showed obvious signs of bloating, lividity, and decomposition. There was skin sloughing, and no positive ID could be made due to the decomposition present on the face. More positive ID of the decedent had been made by Detective Josephine Strachan during the autopsy. Detective Strachan was present during the autopsy and documented her observations and the method of ID in a supplemental report to the original missing persons report. Statements I was advised by Detective Saunier that he believed the decedent was Kiely Rodni based on his investigation. This report was forwarded to the Coroner Division by Deputy Mackey with the Patrol Division on August 23, 2022. Placer County Forensic Pathologist Dr. Gregory Reber, MD, performed an autopsy on the remains of Kiely. Positive ID of the decedent had been made by Detective Josephine Strachan during the autopsy. Detective Strachan was present during the autopsy. The body showed obvious signs of bloating, lividity, and decomposition. There was skin sloughing, and no positive ID could be made due to the decomposition present on the face. No positive ID could be made due to the decomposition present on the face.
That is best practices, fingerprinting. But obviously we know that unless you've been fingerprinted because you are required by your job, like for me, I'm fingerprinted throughout the years because of the type of work that I do, or if you've been arrested, if a person wants to adopt a child domestically or internationally, their fingerprints are required. So there are reasons that fingerprints are on record, right? But if a person like Kiely, let's say, was 16, never arrested, how can we know what her fingerprints are? So the ideal identifying method is fingerprinting.
Why? There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid. Nothing is said about the fingerprints. No mention of them being taken. And then she might have also been identified, but her hard why? There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid. Nothing is said about the fingerprints. No.
As we say in medical school, as we learned in the first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a medical document, does not contain information, it wasn't done. Teeth, there's still a way to obtain DNA, and it has to be mitochondrial DNA. And then they use that DNA, post-mortem, after death DNA, from the dentin, which is below the enamel of the teeth, from bone marrow, etc. And they have a comparison, hopefully, from the toothbrush and or hairbrush of the person in question. And by using pre-death or pre-mortem sample from somebody's toothbrush or hairbrush, they make a comparison, mitochondrial DNA comparison, with the DNA found in those areas of the body that we have discussed.
Document here, it says that for toxicology, the liver tissue was collected, which is in line with cover page, unnumbered, undated. And then the materials for histology, which is an examination of cells, sections of the major organs, plural, are saved as stock tissue. So I'm very interested to hear more about that. What are the sections of the major organs? Were they eligible for DNA identification, which they totally should? And then this line right here, number 197, says evidence. And I am assuming that this is evidence collected during the autopsy itself. And it mentions brushing, swabs and smears, and a DNA card. I know that on the 21st, the sheriff's office came with this incident report where they're saying that no DNA was taken and the DNA collection was not refused either. But if we look at the date, so this is on the 21st, and then on the 23rd, a DNA card is mentioned. So I wonder if that might be how Kiely might have been identified. But considering that she was identified during the autopsy, how did they run a DNA sample in a few hours? I don't know. I'm skeptical, but that would be very impressive. Let's continue.
Trauma, an area of postmortem change on the left wrist at the radial side is about 4.5 centimeters by 1.5 centimeters, where there's a splitting of the exposed dermis, which exposes underlying soft tissue. So we know she had that from a recent surgery, that scar on her left wrist.
Looked at also has a supplement page. It's called supplement number 3. This was reported on October 12th. The interesting part for me here is that Detective Josephine, or Detective Josie, as Sheriff Moon calls her on a legal document. So the detective was present during the autopsy and documented her observations and the method of identification that remains unknown to the public as of today. But they say that there's a supplemental report number 14 where she is sharing and documenting her method of identification. And I am also curious to see this report because she would only really have a few routes here. It could either be the DNA card that was mentioned in the document by Sheriff Moon and Mr. Reber, MD, dental records, which we remember they were unknown in August. I don't know why. There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid. Nothing's said about the fingerprints. No mention of them being taken. And then she might have also been identified by her hardware serial number. Let's just read the part of the incident report that talks about it. Orthopedic hardware, and you can see it here on the images. So on the right is the right hand, left image is the left hand, so Kiely's was in her left hand. Orthopedic hardware attached to the ventral surface, and ventral surface or ventral side refers to the front of the body, of the distal radius, and distal means away from the center of the body, away from the midline of the body. And the radius is just this bone, like this bigger bone that's on the outside of our arm. It's ulna and radius, and so Kiely's was fractured or broken. And basically distal radius is just wrist. Next, we read that the hardware consists of stainless steel, 2-column volar plate held in place by multiple screws. So 2-column means that it literally has 2 columns. The one on the left has 1 column. It's 1 solid plate, and the one on the right is the kind that Kiely had. It's a 2-column plate, and it's held in place by multiple screws. So these colorful screws in the image. And volar plate is just a metallic device. In her case, it was stainless steel. I've also heard some questions on
Position unknown, personal dentist, next of kin, Lindsay.
Mr. Reber, MD, dental records, which we remember they were unknown in August. I don't know why. There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid.
That aside, the next method is dental records. And I think dental records absolutely is a great method. We know that. And as we say in medical school, as we learn in your first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a medical document does not contain information, it wasn't done. We can use presumptive identifiers like the age, race, sex, or some physical characteristics of the victim. Markers, we say. Markers like tattoos, markers like jewelry or piercings. So those can be used as presumptive identifiers. And finally, circumstantial identifiers. In the case of Kiely Rodni, she was missing. Her car was missing. The car was found. One body was found in the car. Okay, most likely that represents Kiely Rodni. And then you say, well, can you utilize any clothing that she was last wearing, jewelry, tattoos, etc.? All of that can be used to make a presumptive diagnosis. Not a definitive diagnosis, but a presumptive diagnosis. We'll talk more about that in part 3. How was diagnosis, or identification, I should say, of Kiely Rodni actually made? Were photographs taken from below water to the point where the car was taken from water? And obviously autopsy, during autopsy photographs. And how was that done, and was their chain of custody maintained?
You're looking at a very recent photo taken of Kiely about a month before she disappeared. We want you to pay attention to her jewelry. She's wearing very distinctive gold-colored necklaces, 1, 2, 3 necklaces, and we do believe that these were the same pieces of jewelry that she was wearing when she went missing.
I'll just point you to the toxicology screen, which was incomplete. As we say in medical school, as we learned in the first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a document, a medical document, does not contain information, it wasn't done. All can understand the specific criteria that we look for in a drowning at autopsy to make an argument towards that diagnosis or cause of death, which, as I have said on another channel recently, drowning is often at autopsy a diagnosis of exclusion, when we can't find something that would point towards a different cause of death.
Looking normal. The right lung weighs 100 grams. The left lung weighs 110 grams. Isn't that different? It's amazing how our bodies can be different on each side. Lungs light maroon to gray tan. Lung moderately decomposed. No apparent lesions. Prominent tissue gas formation distorts the architecture of both lungs. Apparently no airway obstruction. Arteries appear normally developed. A lot of normal formation. The esophagus and stomach
of breathing, but it's related to the sudden immersion in cold or cool water. So I'm going to give you an example. The person is submerged. They do that, and there's an initial gasp. Okay? In that initial gasp, two things can happen. One is aspiration of lake or seawater. In addition, aspiration of the contents, dirt, silt, bacteria, and the like, from the contents of the surrounding water. And when that happens, very often in a process of drowning, a victim gasps and then they go into what we call laryngospasm. Laryngospasm meaning that the larynx, or the vocal cords, which are approximately at this level in the body, in the tracheobronchial tree, will spasm and shut. So you get an initial aspiration of fluid from the outside environs, laryngospasm. And from there, sometimes people don't recover from that laryngospasm, but the contents that they have aspirated on autopsy can be shown, and the physiologic reactions that occur from asphyxia and anoxia, lack of oxygen, will result in bloody tinged, for example, bloody tinged foam. And in a drowning victim, one of the 7, I'm going to call them little star points of the constellation of findings in drowning, is blood-tinged foam. In the majority of cases, when blood-tinged foam from drowning is found on autopsy, it is found below the vocal cords. So from here down into the main stem bronchus, into the bronchial trees, into the bronchioles, which are tiny, tiny, and at the ends of your lungs, the alveoli. So when you find foam or blood-tinged foam on autopsy in a drowning victim, you're looking for foam blood-tinged below the point of bronchospasm. So that would be point number 1. The tracheobronchial tree below the vocal cords, do we see dirt? Do we see silt? Do we even see aspiration of gastric contents that go into the lungs below the vocal cords? It's very important to look at that. And sometimes they can even look at what microbes or bacteria are in the lungs that are growing that would be consistent with, for example, freshwater lake water that the person is found in. So again, go back to the autopsy. Is there any commentary in looking at the tracheobronchial trees? Are they patent, meaning totally clear, no foam, no liquid, no gastric contents in the respiratory tree, no particulate matter like dirt, silt, could even be, if it were in the ocean, little pieces of seaweed, etc. So go back and look. If it was totally patent and there's none of the findings that I've just mentioned, that would point away from drowning. Finally, I want to one can find as part of the process, even after laryngospasm, one can find a regurgitation of gastric contents and gastric fluids. So in the case of Kiely Rodni, as I recall, there were some particulate matter, small amounts of particulate matter of, I think, legumes and peas in the stomach contents found on autopsy. There was some liquid matter, but there were no particulate matter found like legumes and peas in the mouth area. So the presumption was that the liquid that was found in the mouth may indeed represent gastric contents, although of note there were no food particulate matters found in the mouth area on her autopsy.
The esophagus and stomach are patent, continuous, and normally developed. Stomach contains a trace amount of food material consistent with small fragments of peas or beans. Gas, bloating, otherwise unremarkable. Looking normal. The right lung weighs 100 grams. The left lung weighs 110 grams.
Weights in grams. And what we do is we say and we look at averages. And so the average weight of a person who's drowned in lake water, and of course it depends on the measure and the level of decomposition, but the average drowning victim has a combined right and left lung weight of 1,300 grams, plus or minus about 400 grams. So the combined weights that you would be looking for as one of your constellation points would be, does this victim have a combined right and left lung weight of about 900 to about 1,700 grams? So go back and see what was, in the case of Kiely Rodni, the combined right and left lung, the summation of those weights. They were not near 1,300 grams. And in salt, and that would be in lake water, freshwater drownings. In saltwater, it's actually quite a bit more. Okay, there are other findings on be prepped and looked under the microscope. Particularly, we look at the alveoli, which are the very tiny endpoint little airway sacs at the distant portions of the lung. And if those are looked under microscope, there are findings that can be seen with drownings. So that would be another one of the constellation points. The question back to you is, go look and see, were histologic, microscopic evaluations of the alveoli done and documented on this autopsy? Because in the list that I'm giving you, that is an important point. May or may not find on a victim of drowning microscopic changes in the alveoli that are particular to folks who may have drowned. As we say in medical school, as we learned in the first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a medical document does not contain information, it wasn't done. The point of the vocal cords. If there was blood-tinged foam, that would count as a sort of point towards the possibility of a cause of death from drowning. Or do you find foam in the upper airway? And if so, or if you find no foam in the upper airway, that's going to point away from drowning. Now, interestingly, the lungs, when pressed just even with the fingers of the examiner, the gloved fingers of the examiner, the lungs often, because they're so boggy, will bring forth spurts of foam and water. Okay, was that something that was found on autopsy for this particular individual that we're discussing? There are other more particularly specific findings on the lungs proper. One is known as, let me see if I can pronounce this correctly, Paltoff's or Paltoff's spots on the surface of the lungs that are particular blood vessel, tiny findings that you can see with the naked eye that are the result of the physiologic process of drowning, and they are found on the lung surfaces. So were very microscopic punctate, we say punctate like points, called Paltoff's spots. Was that noted on this particular autopsy? As we say in medical school, as we learned in the first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a medical document does not contain information, it wasn't done. And this is also done on, it's actually done on gross examination of bodies of deceased, or of the decedent of deceased bodies, is to look again at the mastoid airway in the bone. There are air cells, pockets, and in the middle ear, the petrous. And there are, with not a microscope, but with your naked eye, if evaluated, the mastoid air cells and the petrous in the middle ear can have, and this is about something like 70% or more of drowning victims have in their mastoid air cells and in the petrous, they have hemorrhages that are a result of the different pressures and the different physiologic processes that happen in drowning. And so that actually, of all the findings, other than the CAT scan finding in the sphenoid sinus that I'm going to talk about, the hemorrhaging in the mastoid air cells and in the petrous, in the middle ear bone, those hemorrhages are extremely common, very common, up to something like 70% of drowning victims have those. Unfortunately, on autopsy, probably close to 70% of victims the medical examiner doesn't actually look there. So, but when it is looked at, those folks that have drowned, 70% have those hemorrhaging in the mastoid bone, in those air cells that back there, and in the middle ear petrous bone. So that's extremely important. And the question is there commentary on the mastoid bone? Is there commentary on the petrous bone in Kiely's autopsy? We're getting towards the end here. Autopsy. When I say virtual, that is a medical concept that has been coined, the term virtual, meaning that it is not in vivo, where the medical examiner is actually hands-on looking either macroscopically, grossly at the body, or microscopically at tissue of the decedent, but rather virtually, and that virtually is done via CAT scan. In drowning victims, yes, generally it is a head-to-toe CAT scan, and they're looking for many different things, but in particular, for a drowning victim, the virtual CAT scan is looking at the sphenoid sinuses, which is the sinus in the nose area. You've got your maxillary, frontal sinuses, maxillary, sphenoid sinuses. Those are the major ones. And the sphenoid sinus, almost pathognomically, by virtual CAT scan. This is like why this virtual CAT scan or virtual autopsy CAT scan is becoming so much more commonplace. You find fluid levels, water, within the sphenoid sinus proper. And really the only way to evaluate for that is by CAT scan. And so my question would be, was a CAT scan done? And if so, what did the sphenoid sinus look like on Kiely? Was there liquid in the sphenoid sinus? Now, a lot of people have commented like, oh, well, you know, these are sort of pie in the sky things like a virtual autopsy with CAT scan. And I would respond by saying actually more and more that is being done. And especially in high profile cases, so that, you know, there is a variety, or there are a variety of methods of coming to the presumptive diagnosis of drowning. It is very often found in drowning victims, and it used to be thought, oh, this is pathognomonic, or this is the gotcha thing for drowning, and that is the pink, bright pink, that is noticed in the gum area and the staining of the teeth, bright pink, in drowning victims. But in the recent literature, what has begun to be understood in terms of why do people who drown often have the pink, bright pink gums and the bright pink teeth staining, it's actually not because a physiologic reaction from drowning, but actually it's a lividity. It is lividity. It is blood that is there, and it's a result of positional changes that the head has made during a period of time after submersion that causes the bright pink gums and teeth staining. If a person has that, it's thought maybe they drowned, but it's, again, not a gotcha, eureka, pathognomonic finding of drowning.
So he sends his captain, Steinhauer. He's like, Wayne wants to know what you want. What do you mean? He wants to know what you want. What do you want to keep your mouth shut, right?
Really? Who said this to you?
Daryl Steinhauer.
Really? Who said this to you?
Daryl Steinhauer.
Daryl Steinhauer?
Right.
And who is he?
The captain.
In 2018, Barry broke his silence, which led to the internal investigation of Wu.
June 1st of 2002.
June 1st, 2002.
Yeah. He was telling me, he says, I gotta talk to you. You know, we're sitting at a table at this. Why are you tapping? Well, I've been seeing this girl. Okay, whatever. And he's all, no, she's 16. It looks like 32, 33, right?
Right.
Barry wasn't the only person aware of these allegations. Garland Liu, another retired deputy, also discussed the Wu investigation with our journalist.
Well, it's kind of one of those things where back in the days there were people that were hanging out with younger girls, but hanging out's not the illegal part.
Right. It's the statutory part.
Yeah, it's the statutory part, and that's.
Yeah.
On the 12th of October 2004, a married couple, Corbin and Jennifer Easterling's jet ski broke down 2 miles from shore in San Pablo Bay. It was before dawn and the water was icy cold. After 19 hours, they were found by the U.S. Coast Guard. Corbin was suffering from extreme hypothermia. He had pulled himself back onto their jet ski and had his arms looped through his wife's life jacket to keep her afloat. Sadly, Jennifer Easterling was deceased when the couple were found by the Coast Guard. Jennifer's autopsy was performed by Gregory Reiber, who found clear evidence that Jennifer had drowned. However, due to bruising found on her body, he concluded that she died as a result of being suffocated and listed her death as a homicide. Corbin Easterling was subsequently charged with his wife's murder and spent 19 months in jail until a report was made which highlighted the many inconsistencies in Reiber's findings and which concluded that Jennifer Easterling had in fact died due to hypothermia and accidental drowning. Corbin Easterling struggled considerably after his release from jail and 11 months later, died from a meth overdose.
I have recently reviewed the pathologist's final report of autopsy, which listed the cause of death, in this case as drowning. There were no other significant contributing conditions listed. I conferred with Detective Saunier, and he told me there was no indication of foul play regarding the criminal investigation into the death of Kiely. The manner of death in this case has been determined to be accidental. So,
there are a variety of methods of coming to the presumptive diagnosis of drowning. If in anybody's autopsy the highlights that I've given you tonight have not really been found, then it would be up to the medical examiner to sort of take the diagnosis of presumptive drowning and call it that. Or say, I don't see many of these findings, I think it's indeterminate. I am not going to proffer
or control. But yeah, so they haven't filled that forensic pathologist. Wonder why? Because it's a place that no one wants to follow in after what they have to sign off for? Don't know, it's possible.
the body showed obvious signs of bloating, lividity, and decomposition. There was skin sloughing, and no positive ID could be made due to the decomposition present on the face.
Right? Because, like I said, in the whole investigation, all the 20 press conferences and celebration of life and concert in the middle of the search, which means it's all fake to me. They never said we collected pictures of kids at party with Kiely. They never said where her last known place was. They probably have some stuff, but maybe it's not enough to prove anyone to bring charges. And so
in what I've read, the close to 20 pages of information that was published, is not consistent with an accidental drowning.
Why? There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid, nothing said about the fingerprints, no mention of them being taken, and then she might have also been identified, but her heart. Why? There was no dental records pulled up for a missing kid, nothing said about the fingerprints, no.
Can you share your honest thoughts or opinion as to what you think may have happened to her? Do you care to share that?
To be fully honest, my biggest concern is that somebody, and I've said this in other interviews, somebody knew she was drunk, offered to give her a ride home, and they didn't give her a ride home. And they could be across the world at this point with how long she's been gone. And I'm worried that I have a feeling, and obviously, I don't know, I have a feeling that she is still alive and she's still out there and she's still fighting, but that there's somebody else involved, and that's not confirmed. That's just what I believe. I think there has to be somebody else involved in this. But
it's just so sad.
This some sort of an abduction or even a violent crime or any of those types of scenarios, and then
some sort of an abduction or even a violent crime or any of those types of scenarios, and then
times where we have shut down areas. We closed off the boat ramp at one point in time to cover like certain area and ground and things like that. So
at one point in time to cover up on
for DNA identification, which they totally should. And then this line right here, number 197, says evidence, and I am assuming that this is evidence collected during the autopsy itself, and it mentions brushings, swabs and smears, and a DNA card. I know that on the 21st, the sheriff's office came with this incident report where they're saying that no DNA was taken and the DNA collection was not refused either. But if we look at the date, so this is on the 21st, and then on the 23rd, the DNA card is mentioned. So I wonder if that might be how Kiely might have been identified. But considering that she was identified during the autopsy, how did they run a DNA sample in a few hours? I don't know, I'm skeptical, but that would be very impressive. Let's
You're looking at a very recent photo taken of Kiely about a month before she disappeared. We want you to pay attention to her jewelry. She's wearing very distinctive gold-colored necklaces, 1, 2, 3 necklaces, and we do believe that these were the same pieces of jewelry that she was wearing when she went missing.
By first flipping it underwater, 2 windows were already opened, and they managed to break another one so that Kiely's belongings flew out into the water, and they were left there for over 2 weeks until a civilian found several items. Law enforcement were given the evidence but never entered the water themselves to see if anything else was down there still. Then
a fake case, like something happened somewhere else, and this is just this tornado of cover-ups on top of cover-ups on top of cover-ups. And I was saying that before I saw Knives Out as well. But yeah, that's one major thing. The whole investigation, the way it's done, letting Sammy involved, how people have said things on a case and then they like change it. And it's just, you know, there's been, and then even the police, the LE, and I'm saying stuff I said before, so I apologize. They never really on their press conferences gave any information on the case. They were just like talking and saying, we worked hard, we did this. If you thought of it, we thought of it. We are looking at everything. Please send in photos. If you have more evidence, let me know.
It typically for us in such, you know, that was extremely shallow waters, and that was rare for us to have that visibility.
It's like going through mud. So these are tough operations.
You know, like Paul was saying, it's typically what we're finding stuff in that you can't see in, or it would have been found already.
A diving operation like that is really almost like you're going into the water blind, and they're basically searching with hands.
It's very shallow, no current, great visibility.
And tracking underwater is an extremely difficult thing to do.
Well, that was very easy for us to do.
We're appreciative that they were able to come out and locate it. I also don't want to take away, though, from anything from our volunteers, as well as law enforcement that have been out there. I mean, we literally had people swim.
One thing that I keep mentioning is, why have all the big channels left Kiely Rodni? That's so weird. Why isn't there any kind of news stories, newspaper, forensic files, 48 hours, Dateline, you know, shows on Kiely or the Kiely circumstance? Why isn't there shown any kind of substantial proof? And then there's the whole YouTube community as well. Hey, I have some boundaries where I kind of stop, just because I don't want to like make anyone in power too mad.
To coordinate one with the other, to communicate one with the other, because especially if concerned about a drowning versus a drowning suicide versus a homicide, and then somebody was dumped, so to speak, in a body of water, every single aspect of the case needs to be communicated in a very transparent fashion amongst agencies, so that when the autopsy report or any of the as we say in medical school, as we learned in the first year, second year, third year, all the way up through my fellowship and on, medico-legally, if a medical document does not contain information, it wasn't done.
So, as much as I love different people and their ideas of what happened, I understand that I don't know what happened. It's just so many things that are wrong that I just think that they're covering up a cover-up, and something else happened. And yeah,